Winter rains have turned the star wheel, springtime is upon us. Winter rains have turned the star wheel, springtime is upon us. Sharp the smell of loam bursting on our eyes, the turrets of the tulips. Winter rains have turned the star wheel, springtime is upon us. Greening is the grass, soft upon our brows, the sunlight warm caresses. Winter rains have turned the star wheel, springtime is upon us.
Our invocation this morning is in honor of Palm Sunday, and it's by David Rankin. Palm Sunday is found whenever we are serving a noble and unpopular cause with selfless devotion, holding to the ideals of truth and justice. Whenever we are seeking to uplift the fallen, to comfort the brokenhearted, to strengthen and encourage the weak and hopeless. Whenever we are working bravely and persistently in the face of abuse and criticism to establish more equitable relations in the world. Whenever we are sacrificing our lives in behalf of what we believe to be the service of love for all humanity. That is Palm Sunday.
So today we're going to have two stories about Palm Sunday and Easter, because we'll be, and then we'll have a dialogue about something of the teachings of Jesus that might be very interesting for you. So my story goes first. It was spring. It was spring in Jerusalem in the Jewish year 3780. 3780. That would be the year 30 in the Common Era, if there was a Common Era in those days. But there wasn't, so it's 3780. It was the week before the Passover holiday, and there were many pilgrims who were flowing into the Judean capital. The people of Jerusalem were used to pilgrims, visitors coming to the city, because after all, it was the most holy site for all the Jews, and the Jews were at that time scattered across the eastern part of the Mediterranean. And so it was a kind of a religious requirement, if you were religious, to make a pilgrimage to Jerusalem. It actually said go 4 times a year, but I think that probably, if you were coming from Rome, that probably was something you probably didn't do. To go to temple or perform sacrifices in the temple is why the visitors came. So there were 2 parades that spring day. The people of Jerusalem were used to parades. But the 2 parades was very different. It was a contradiction. And these 2 parades are special because the 2 parades will capture all the contradictions of Jewish society and put them on display. Coming from the west, the Roman governor of Idumea, or as we say in English, Judea, Pilate's parade was a military parade with several hundred heavily armored men marching in tight formation, in step, with the cleats on their sandals or shoes, banging on the stone road, making grunting noises as they march. You can sort of picture them, marching along, drums. Pilate's parade was a show of force. It was intended to intimidate. It was a shock and awe of the conquering Romans over the subject Jews. That was the intention of the parade. Coming from the east, a group of laborers, fishermen, and peasants from Galilee, a poverty-stricken outlying area. People, if you wanted to insult somebody, you say you'd speak like a Galilean. And for Jerusalem elite, there was nothing but contempt for Galilee. Leading that parade and sitting on the donkey, according to the story, was Yeshua bar Yosef, an illiterate country sage who taught by telling stories and provoking the authorities. Popular, charismatic, something of a comic, a healer, a mystic. He was considered by the people who heard him to be a great rabbi, even though he had no formal training from a rabbinical school, and a prophet. He was considered to be a prophet, even though he was not sponsored by the religious authorities. It was rumored, lots of people said it, they spoke to each other and they said, shh, that he was Messiah. Messiah, a very special person indeed in Jewish society. Messiah literally meaning anointed to lead a people. So the people, their Messiah would lead an uprising, a king as liberator, sort of a Che Guevara, an armed militant perhaps, someone to lead them in battle against Pilate and the Romans and the Caesars. But what kind of Messiah could this Yeshua be? Yeshua was riding on a donkey. He was not followed by soldiers, but rather unarmed laborers, women and men of no account. Yet far more of Jerusalem greeted his parade than greeted Pilate's. The people look at Pilate's legions with silent contempt, and they looked at Yeshiva's parade with expectation. Maybe he is the one. The liberation has come. This was the historical Jesus, as we have been taught to call him. Jesus is the English corruption of Yeshua. Some people did in fact find a liberation in Jesus, not through an uprising with swords in hand, but because the rabbi taught a different kind of wisdom that they were people used to hearing. Jesus said, being godly was a matter of the heart, of love and right relationships. God's home was within them, all around them, and between them. We don't hear much of Yeshua's teachings about God's home in most churches that say they are Christian. Yet examining the record, we have to say this is the basic to what Jesus talked about. Of course, our covenantal translation renders the words a little different. Kingdom of God, or sometimes kingdom of heaven, is how we usually hear it translated in our English Bible. The phrase in the New Testament used 100 times is Basela toi Troie. Now, Basela could mean a domain, an estate, a household, home. The word implies a community of people in relationship to each other and the head of the household. Some liberal Christians translate it as Commonwealth of God, as they are just as right on as those who translate it as kingdom. But what is at stake is our understanding of what Jesus was saying. We are in community with each other in God's love, inside us and among us, and in between all of us. So my understanding leads me to translate it as beloved community, rather than how we get taken away to heaven as the reward for believing the right dogma. After he died, the people who had experienced the gift of the Spirit in his presence decided that the Spirit only came to those who believed what they believed. Many Unitarian Universalists had bad experience with Christian churches. They were taught that they must believe things that they found unbelievable. But as a result, they resist hearing the teachings of this remarkable teacher. There are two parades that entered Jerusalem that spring day. The day the Christians call Palm Sunday, one parade led by Pilate, representing violence, male supremacy, elitism, the exploitation of peasants to support the rich and the privileged. And the other parade, represented by a mocking of Pilate and his whole way of being, a liberator who presented nonviolent resistance, a liberator who said God was like the love of a parent for children, a liberator who made jokes, and the conventional ways of society was managed. Pilate rode on a big war horse. Jesus rode on a donkey, mocking power and privilege. One parade represented the domination system with its elitism. The other parade had a poor people marching with their rabbi who treated them like they had a brain, a soul, and told stories that included them. Pilate's parade represented the powerful, the rich. The other parade was led by a third-world peasant who worked off the off-season as a construction laborer. And what he knew of Scripture he learned by chanting and pointing his finger at the sacred text as a disciple of John the Baptist. Pilate, the representative of power and privilege, asked a question at the end of that week. Jesus then stood before Pilate and accused of sedition because he was rumored to be the Messiah. Pilate asked, "What is truth?" As if truth were a proposition to be grasped with one's mind, rather than a way to live one's life, close to the beauty of the earth and its relationship with one's sisters and brothers. "What is truth?" asked the leader of one parade. "Be true, answered the other.
And if you've spent some time in our UURE spaces, you may have heard of a woman named Sophia Lyon-Foss. And she really revolutionized the way that modern RE works and the way that we interact with our children in our congregations. And she thought it was very important to do storytelling, but to think about the way that we tell stories to children and the way they interact with the world. So this morning we are going to have you experience the way that many congregations who are having RE programs teach the story of Holy Week and Easter to our children. And we actually still use Reverend Foss's words from 1945. A lot of our congregations are still adapting what she wrote then. So most of this piece is still her words. But just a little bit of introduction that we usually tell the kids. So we explain that Jesus was a great teacher long ago who preached God's love. And Jesus taught that we should care for the poor and forgive people who hurt us. Jesus influenced many people to love one another as they loved God, and 12 of those people were called the disciples of Jesus. They traveled with Jesus and listened to him preach day after day. In Jesus' time, the Roman leaders and many of the Jewish political religious leaders who were in privilege at that time did not like him. They were afraid that he would lead a rebellion and upset the way things were. As Jesus became more popular, some of these leaders planned to kill him. One of Jesus' disciples, named Judas, betrayed Jesus and helped the leaders with their plan. The night before Jesus died, he was celebrating the Jewish holiday of Passover. He celebrated at a Seder with his 12 disciples. The next day, Jesus was arrested, and then he was killed. What happened after Jesus died became the religion we know as Christianity. Christians believed that after Jesus was killed, he rose from the dead to go to heaven. But many years ago, a religious educator named Sophia Foss explains in a way that's an alternative to what happened after Jesus died. And this is her take on it for those who don't necessarily believe in that literal resurrection for what folks can get from this story. So what she wrote is that the people who followed Jesus were brokenhearted after he died. They struggled to understand why God had allowed their teacher to be killed. Surely someone so connected to God, so overflowing in goodness, did not deserve the punishment of a criminal or a rebel. As these people gathered day after day in each other's homes, they began to recall the wonderful experiences they had had with Jesus. They told one another of times when Jesus was wise and times when Jesus was kind. The very tone of Jesus' voice and the look on his face would come back to them so vividly that it seemed sometimes as though Jesus were right there with them. Some of the people had dreams in which Jesus seemed so real that the dreamers could not tell if they had been asleep or awake when they saw him. Some declared positively that they had seen Jesus again. He had talked with them. The rumor spread that Jesus had come out of his coffin, that 2 of his disciples had seen him, and that several of the women had talked with him. They would see him only for a few moments, and then he would mysteriously disappear again. Finally, several of them dreamed they saw Jesus rise up from the earth, higher and higher, until he disappeared entirely. They believed he had gone to heaven to be with God. After that, their experiences of seeing with him and talking with him stopped. People who had had these experiences believed that Jesus was different from other people. Some believed that Jesus was so holy and great he would come back to the earth and save the world. The years passed by. The people who knew Jesus died. Their children and their children's children also died, but Jesus did not come back. It has been over 2,000 years and Jesus has still not come back. There are many who still hope he will come back to life again. And others believe that this Jesus will never live again on earth. But his spirit never needs to die. His spirit is in his words and deeds, which still give us wisdom today. For example, when he was alive, Jesus taught the golden rule: treat others the way you want to be treated. Jesus gave the Sermon on the Mount, where he said that people who are poor, hurt, and struggling are loved by God, and therefore we must love them too. When someone's physical body dies, the people around them who loved and valued them will keep their memory alive. Just like the followers of Jesus have remembered his teachings and his spirit long after his death. Whatever you believe about Jesus, we are honoring that spirit together today.
join in a time of meditation, prayer, thoughtful reflection. Source of life, who is known by many names, we gather with gratitude for the earth and all who journey on it, in the air, on the lands, and in the many waters. We give thanks for the interconnectedness of all creation, reminding ourselves of our dependence, our contingency, our need for each other. We recognize we have not always done what we aspire to do. Living out the call to justice, our living tradition calls us to recognizing the whole creation as extension of one being, hearing the sigh of creation, yearning for wholeness, praying the harm our way of life inflicts on the creation. The Prophet Muhammad asks, what actions are most excellent? To gladden the heart of a human being, to feed the hungry, to help the afflicted, to lighten the sorrow of the sorrowful, to remove the wrongs of the injured. Let us not forget, the psalmist asks, who is fit to hold power and worthy to act in God's place? Those with a passion for the truth, who are horrified by injustice, who act with mercy to the poor and take up the cause of helpless. We have not let go of our selfish concerns and see the whole creation as sacred. Let us not forget the teacher from Galilee who asks, what is the greatest commandment? To love your Creator, to love your neighbors as you love yourself, to undermine the oppressive powers of life-giving action. Love is to be in solidarity with all who suffer, to act for justice, and to teach others to act for justice. Let us join in the communion of silence, contemplating what we've heard in joys and sorrows, what we've thought of our own prayers, and let us meditate together, remembering that your whole community is in this time of silence praying their own prayers. The reading this morning that will our little dialogue homily, which is coming next, is from Matthew 19:26. And what Jesus says in this dialogue can be found in similar thoughts can be found in the Quran and the Buddhist sutras and in the prophets of the Old Testament. But saying it was nevertheless a subversive act, an act that angered the elite. So it's called, just then a man came up to Jesus and asked, "Teacher, what good thing must I do to have a good and meaningful life?" Jesus replied, "Why do you ask me what is good and meaningful? There's only the good Creator. If you want to enter the good life, keep the wisdom given to Moses." "Which ones?" he inquired. Jesus replied, "You shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not give false testimony, honor your father and mother, and love your neighbor as yourself." "All these I have kept," the young man said. "What do I still lack?" Jesus answered, "If you want to be whole and loving, go sell your possessions and give them to the poor, and you will know beloved community. Then come and follow us." When the young man heard this, he went away very sad, because he had great wealth. And then Jesus said to his disciples, "Truly I tell you, it is hard for someone who grasps property to enter the beloved community. And again I tell you, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than it is for someone who is owned by their possessions to enter the house of God." You could get into trouble saying things like that.
Today's dialogue sermon is about how Martin Luther King Jr. and even Gandhi learned the art of nonviolent resistance from Jesus. Now we're gonna...
Excuse me?
Yes?
You're kidding, right?
No, really. Jesus was one of the great teachers of nonviolent resistance.
You're talking about the same Jesus that I hear about in Sunday school? You know, turn your other cheek, and if they ask for your coat, give them your shoes.
Cloak.
Cloak, oh, whatever. Come on, Jesus wasn't a resistance fighter. He was a wimp.
I think that we really need to look at this in the proper social context.
Social context, you do.
Yep. Because if you did, you'd see Jesus in a whole new light.
I would.
You would. Like Matthew 5:40. If anyone would sue you and take your coat, give them your cloak as well.
Exactly. In other words, give them everything, whatever they want, no matter how much it might hurt you, deprive you.
Not in the right social context, though. See, back in the day, Jesus' day, that is, there were masters and there were slaves, and masters could do just about anything to slaves and get away with it. They could beat them, they could force them to work until they dropped, they could even take the clothes right off their backs.
Just give me your coat?
Exactly. There was no way that the slave could stop this, not directly. So Jesus said, okay, when your master asks for your coat, give it to him, and in fact, give him your cloak too, even though you'll freeze to death without it. Show him that abusing his slave is just stupid. It jeopardizes his own future.
It shows him to be a bad master.
Right. And what's more, in the social context of the time, people who saw nakedness were as ashamed as those who were naked. So giving your master your cloak, and therefore all your clothes, would make the master as ashamed as the slave. See? You can resist by showing your master he's doing wrong, and by shaming him, all without violence.
All right, you say so, but it doesn't sound like that to me.
Not at first, but if you put it in the right context, the same thing applies to Matthew 5:41. If a soldier forces you to go a mile, then go with them for 2 miles.
Yeah, in other words, even if you're forced into carrying a soldier's pack, just submit to the Romans.
Social context, my guy. See, back in Jesus' day, subject people were treated like mules or pack horses by the Romans, just beasts of burden. But there was also a law saying that a centurion, a soldier, could only make a subject carry all his stuff for exactly 1 mile, and no more. More than a mile, and it was abuse, and the centurion could be sent to jail or even killed.
So the occupying army had some authority over the subject, but they had to be responsible too?
You got it. And Jesus said force them to be responsible. Offer to go past the mile marker and show them the limits of their authority. Make him look at you as something more than a pack animal and see that he's abusing you. You're resisting by forcing him to realize what it means to abuse another human being.
Nonviolent resistance, I guess, huh?
You got it. Not so wimpy after all, huh?
Maybe.
And then there's the most famous one of all. If anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also.
Right. Don't fight back. Suffering's good for you. How is that nonviolent resistance?
It's not, but then that's not what Jesus meant at all. See, back in Jesus' day, slaves were disciplined in a certain way. If the master was even a tiny bit displeased, he would strike the slave on the right cheek with the knuckles of his right hand. A little backhanded slap. But a master would strike a peer, an equal, in the opposite way on the left cheek, so it's like a direct hit.
So when Jesus said turn the left cheek,
he's telling the slaves, force your master to treat you as an equal and not a slave. You have to put up with being hit, those are the rules. But after that's done, turn your left cheek. And if he wants to strike you again, he's going to have to do it in the way that a man strikes an equal, not the way a master strikes a slave. Once again, the master is forced to see things in a whole new light and ultimately to try to change his behavior.
So none of these quotes are about being passive.
None of them. Jesus was never passive. These are actually clever and insidious acts of nonviolent resistance. And he told his followers, if you do things like this often enough, if you stick with it, you can change the world.
Now that's my kind of Jesus.
The rebel, the outlaw, and the teacher of Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr., and many, many others.
And definitely not a wimp.
Not even a little.
You learn something new every day. Our closing hymn, I think, is next. Oh, no, we didn't. We were supposed to sum up. Well, my sum up is the translation of the New Testament, the translation of the Christian scriptures that we have, sometimes it lends itself to an idea that the rich and the powerful are approved of by the New Testament. So that it's approved by the New Testament, but in fact, many of the things are in fact stories of resistance. So this, for example, Palm Sunday, riding in on a donkey is to make fun of the old myth that the Messiah would ride in on a horse and be followed by thousands of soldiers to liberate the people. Liberation in this story is it's yourself engaged in nonviolent resistance.
And I think, if you look at a lot of the other stories about the early church in Acts and the epistles, and you look at some of what the early church was up to, you can see them doing a lot of this kind of thing on a community level. A lot of the early churches were basically storehouses for goods that they would give out to the poor in the community, and the Romans were really suspicious of what they were doing, but they just kind of kept doing it, and they were good at it to the point that when Rome tried to take over the function of doing this again at the temples, they realized that the Christians had basically become the social workers of the whole empire, and the Roman temples weren't doing it anymore. So I think it's no surprise that it was a religion that originally caught on with the poor masses and with women.
Now let us sing hymn number 63, Spring Has Now Unwrapped the Flowers. You see that when Jim and I planned the music for this Sunday, we thought it would be spring. Now, hear my benediction. This is Arapaho wisdom. When we show respect for other living things and for each other, then life herself responds with respect for others, for us. Walk now in the way of wisdom. Go in peace, go in love.